in getting those nets out. It's not just whales that are going to be saved. It's going to be the dugongs, the dolphins, the rays, and the turtles, etc., etc. And it's going to be all of those sharks. It's going to be the 19 species of sharks that are targeted by the Queensland government in the culling program. The 19 species of shark that get shot when they're caught in nets and drumlines by Queensland government contractors. Except, of course, now in the Great Barrier Reef, that's not supposed to happen. They're targeting 3 species there, and they're not supposed to be killing them. But there are questions remaining over how that is being conducted at the moment. And let me tell you, we're on it.
Before we wrap up, I did want to ask you, of course, about the sensational headlines that were in the news a couple of weeks ago now, and that's the famous Tinny man. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened that day and what this gentleman did?
Oh, what a remarkable man, what a remarkable incident to have occurred. It's interesting. One news reporter on a very prominent radio station in Brisbane interviewed me live on the radio and asked me a series of questions where the premise was that that day was some kind of setup. How was it that on that day there happened to be a film crew on the beach? The film crew that is about to release a huge documentary was on the beach that morning and had a drone up in the air, and there was a whale entanglement that day. The same day that we got a whole lot of supporters down to the beach because of that whale entanglement. But on that day, there happened to be a dude out in his boat, in his tinny, aiming to go surfing. He was looking for a manta ray that he'd heard about out on the water that day. And he saw the spout of this whale, this juvenile whale that, as it turned out, was entangled. He saw the whale and then saw that it was in the net. And he looked around and saw no one on the water. There were no boats heading towards that whale, and he decided to do something about it. And I guess he was lucky, the whale was lucky that it was a situation where a person with the right skill set and a situation that he was able to deal with without putting himself into too much danger. Now, don't get me wrong, he did put himself into some danger. It was a heroic act, but it was also, one that I don't want to see have to be repeated.
Yeah.
And I am so glad that it came out the way it did, because it might not have otherwise. If it had been a mother and calf, or just a calf with a mother nearby, the whole situation's different. So, but, Django, aka the Tinny man, he was able to dive into the water and, get the net off that shark, off that shark. I've done it again. I've done that before. Off that whale and release that whale and have a good outcome, And you could see that on the video, the helicopter video of him pumping his fists when he did it. So the other thing that came out of that was that, he was followed to the boat ramp, and he was spoken to on the water by fisheries officers who arrived not long after he was trying to leave. And they told him that he would be fined. He was issued a fine.
How big was the fine? Just out of curiosity, do we know?
No, I'm not going to say what the fine got to, but it started. It was over $1,000 initially, but Django is not disclosing it. So I'm not going to disclose that
course.
As well. But there was a fine issued. But I know he was getting nervous when he was seeing reported in the press about what the fine could have been. Now I'll tell you what the fine could have been. He could have had a fine for approaching a whale in distress. So there is a law about being close to a whale, but there's also specifies a whale entangled. There was a fine available to the government for encroaching what's now a 20-metre exclusion zone from the gear. And that fine maxes out at $27,000. And there is another fine. Now, Queensland's unusual. Queensland stands out on this one in this country, because in New South Wales, the equivalent fine is $22,000. In Queensland, the fine for, what do they call it? Interference with shark control program equipment, with a shark net or a drumline. Interference can max out at $67,000+. Now that's completely ambit. That's just a ridiculous amount. But when Django was hearing these stories, he was starting to get a bit nervous. And there was a couple on the Gold Coast who run a business on the Gold Coast, saw the stories about what Django did and saw the possibility of him having a fine that might have reached $20,000. They decided to launch an appeal to have that fine and his court action covered should it come to that. And they put that appeal out. But they were also, they foresaw that the fine might get withdrawn. And so when they put that out through GoFundMe, they said any unspent funds we'll put into marine conservation research. We'll find a group to do that. And the fine was withdrawn by fisheries. I think they decided the publicity might eat them if they issued a fine on this one. It's interesting, their press release following that said that Tinny Man, Django, was lucky because he had no previous convictions and all that sort of thing. So, yeah. Let's see how that plays out when they give it to somebody else a fine. But let's hope it doesn't come to that. But we, the Apex Harmony campaign, were very, very fortunate in this, because that fundraising raised over $16,000, and we were invited to accept that fundraising for the campaign and for Sea Shepherd. And there was another campaign by another group that I think it was in the order of $6,000 or $7,000 was raised, and that was distributed to AMCS and HCI. So that's my understanding. Yeah. So other groups. So there was some great benefit that rolled out into this. So I wonder how that plays in the offices of the Minister for Fisheries as well. But you know, we're certainly already using those funds to help us in this campaign to remove those shark nets. So that's been good for us and been good for the campaign, which will be good for the whales and the sharks and all the other animals.